Hello, everyone. So after more than a year, the FIDE Candidates Tournament is finally up and going again. We have 8 of the world's strongest grandmasters all fighting it out in this tournament, trying to see who will finally earn the right to challenge Magnus Carlsen for the World Chess Championship 2021. Now, actually, I wanted to go through the Fabiano versus MVL game from round 7. Yeah, wait, let me just check. This is round. Yeah, so I actually wanted to go through the Fabiano versus MVL game in round 7. That was played on Monday because that was a very instructive game. I actually looked at the live stream commentary for that game, and yeah, it was a very dramatic game lah. Basically, the problem is that the end game was very tough, and I'm still trying to look through and understand it. So probably I will yeah give me some time, and then hopefully I'll be able to share it with all of you all in a future live stream. In the meantime, I'll be going through another game played yesterday in round 8. This was between Anish Giri taking the white pieces versus Wang. And it starts off with Catalan opening, the G3 Catalan opening. That is one of my favorite openings as white over here. And black goes for this slightly passive but very solid bishop to e7 variation. So bishop to g2, castles, and pawn takes. This is a very common theme in the Catalan. This is actually the open Catalan defense. And queen to c2, of course, you're trying to regain the pawn, and a6. Now, as in many of these queen pawns games, black is not advised to try and hold on to this pawn over here. So let's say something like bishop to b5, then actually it turns out that black has to it's very hard for black to hold on to this pawn. Either that or he has to compromise a lot on his position to try and hold on to it. So let's say, for example, after a4, straight away trying to undermine this. I mean, those of you who play queens can be accepted will be very familiar with it. Then, I mean, if you play c6, then already you have takes, and then knight to g5. You see this already, black cannot save this rook. You can't play knight to d5 because of the mating threats over here, and it's basically very hard for black to play over here simply because this bishop on the long diagonal is so bloody strong. On the other hand, if he tries to play a6, then actually it's no use because white can just take, and then after that they pin along this file. That means again black can't really do anything to keep the pawn. So again, so that's why black is not advised to try and hold on to this pawn, and indeed he doesn't. He chooses to play a6. Now, of course, white can just take straight away on c4, but I think he chooses to play a4 first, just trying to stop b5. Bishop to d7, and now queen takes c4. He does take the pawn. Bishop to c6. Over here, I like one of my favorite moves is knight to e5, but of course there are many other moves that white can make over here, and he chooses bishop to f4. Now, in this kind of Catalan positions, this I always find it a bit annoying. Like, where am I supposed to put this dark square bishop? If I can put it on e3, but then it blocks the pawn, and then it allows the knight to g5, knight to g4. I can put it on f4, but it allows things like the knight here, and then basically is trying to harass your dark square bishop. And usually in this kind of positions, you will either see it on the long diagonal over here, or people love to play bishop to g5, which is actually really bishop to g5 is actually the main line in this kind of openings. Like after this, something like this is one of the lines that was proposed and played in an earlier game, and the idea here is that even though white has given up the bishop pair, he is hoping to bank on his extra space and the open files over here. Let's say after something like rook to d1, he's trying to bank on this extra space, his open files. He has this knight, very active knight over here, and hopefully it helps to compensate for the loss of his two bishops over here. So that's bishop to g5, but instead white chooses to go for bishop to f4. And over here I see many possible replies by black. I mean, he can play knight to h5, just trying to annoy this bishop, but of course at the cost of making this knight off center. He can try to play knight to d5, but I think over here instead he chooses to go for for bishop to do d6. And now white faces a choice because he can either retreat the bishop and then like basically he's forced to move twice in a row. But over here, white actually makes a very interesting decision, which is to completely ignore this threat and just continue with development as per normal. Right. So at first glance, it looks a bit weird. Like, why will you allow your opposition to get double pawns, right? And then not only that, these pawns over here in the center, they look quite weak. Surely black has a way of attacking them, right? But actually, it turns out that white has quite a lot of compensation for these double pawns. First of all, they are not very weak because if white just needs to play something like e3, and then he has actually quite good control of the center, and you notice that these double pawns, the f4 pawn is actually reinforcing the control of this e5 square, which eventually white wants to put a knight over there in the future. And not only that, when you capture like this, you are also getting another thing in return for white, which is this open g4 over here, which is actually one of the main reasons why white just completely ignored the threat on f4. So the idea is that after white plays something like king to h1, he can just double rooks over here, and then he has a lot of play on the king side basically. So we can think of it like white has a lot of very good chances both in the center and on the king side at the cost of like getting a pair of double pawns. So I think it's quite good compensation over here. Right, so now it is back to move. I'm going to flip the board and let's take a look. Okay, so black knows that white has these pawns, he has good control of the center. Anytime he's going to come down on g4, he has control over the king side. So how should black respond, right? Which other part of the board can he try and find counterplay? And naturally, you would look at the queen side over at this part of the board where his pieces are still relatively concentrated over here. You can still try and generate some play over there, and that's exactly what he does. He plays a5. The idea being that he wants to fix these pawns. He wants to be able to play something like knight a6, knight b4. Then maybe hopefully in the future he plays knight to d5, and then he's able to hold the position together. Right. Okay, so I'll just flip back to the white side. So a5 by black, e3. So of course he stabilizes the pawn center. He stabilizes the pawn center over here. Knight to a6. So both sides are going through their plans pretty normally. Knight to e5. Again, I already said that this is a very common move in this kind of positions. Bishop takes, king takes, and c6. So again, you see from black's perspective, he wants to take control of this d5 square so that eventually knight to b4, knight to d5, you can get onto there. Now you notice the white bishop is no longer here, so you can't really contest control of the light squares. And I feel that that is really the essence of black's plan over here. Even though if you look from his perspective, the position might look a little bit cramped for him. I feel that he still has a lot of play here. He has a lot of potential to defend this position, especially if he tries to fight for control over these light squares over here. Right? Again, with the knight b4 and knight d5 ideas that I mentioned just now, and then in the future maybe he can even consider some knight to e4 ideas over here. Right? So a very solid position by black, even though it might look slightly cramped. Right? And over here, white plays a very interesting move, h3. What's the idea behind this move? First of all, it is actually not to stop the knight from coming to g4 because there's no reason why black will actually want to play that. But the reason is that you want to occupy this open file, right? You want to occupy this open file, you want to double the rooks here, but this king is in the way. So where are you going to put it? You can put it on h1, yes, but then that will leave black with the future option of something like queen to d5 check, and then gaining a tempo. I mean, obviously black can't play it now, but it's a real threat in the future, right? So that's why white plays a h3, so that he has this king to h2 move, so that black cannot gain any tempo with the checks along this long diagonal over here. So h3 and queen to b6. Okay, I mean, is an okay move so far. Queen to e2, and now when again you want to look at black's position, I think Wang Hao probably felt that his position was very cramped. It felt a little bit too passive, and for a lot of players who love to play actively, you won't be surprised that they will try to find a very active move, which over here Wang Hao actually played c5, which at first glance it looks okay, right? You are just opening up the position, you are gaining more space for your pieces, and if white takes, then actually black does recaptures, and he's aiming for this e5 e4 square over here, and is quite okay for black in honestly. But the problem here is if c5 is that white doesn't have to take. He can actually keep the tension on the board and then continue development as per normal with something like rook to d1, which is actually what white played, so that now if black takes, then suddenly white is the one who has control of the center, right? So actually that's why a lot of people felt that c5 was a bit premature in this position. In fact, what they felt black should have done was to continue on with the plan as per normal, with knight to b4, and then eventually with the knight to d5, taking control over these light squares. Again, it looks passive, but black has a very solid position. I think he has every chance of holding this position together and defending quite well, right? And not just that, if really he does want to play c5 in the future, he should prepare more with like putting the rooks in the center, and then just putting a knight here before he actually goes for this c5 break. And by then it probably will be a lot stronger than actually doing it now. But anyway, black plays c5 prematurely, I would say. And actually white does, he really doesn't take. He actually continues with the rook d1 idea that I mentioned just now. And after takes, and then now you see suddenly you compare the activity of black's pieces as compared to white. White already has managed to activate one of his rooks. He has the upcoming threat of doubling his rooks and then taking over the d file. On the other hand, you see white's rooks over here are not so active. His knight is a bit off center, not doing a very good job when they should really be on these squares instead, right? So black realizes that he has not much choice. He has to try and fight for this d file before white actually is able to land his rook on d1, which is why he plays rook to d8. Very normal response over here, right? And actually over here, after black thought for a long while, he actually decides to play rook takes d8 because if you look at the position, you realize that actually black cannot reply with recapturing with the rook, because after something like queen to b5, maybe I should explain a bit more over here. What happened was that after black played c5, after black played c5, another problem with c5, which I didn't mention just now, is that you actually relinquish control over this b5 square, and then you allow things like you allow things like queen to b5, knight to b5, and then actually if the queen comes here, is actually quite bad for black, because we are looking down at all these weak pawns over here, right? So again, that was another problem on c5, and that was why when later on, when you take and all this, then white recaptures over here, then actually black can't recapture with rook takes d8, because white has this very nice reply that's exploiting all these weak pawns over here, which is queen to b5. And see, after queen to c7, okay, so now if let's say queen takes, then suddenly pawn takes, and then oh my gosh, this pawn is going to fall, this knight is under attack, he has to retreat. And after this pawn falls, this pawn is also weak, and basically black is just losing complete control of the queen side, and it's very bad for black basically. So black cannot trade queens over here. He has to play something like queen to c7, but then after queen to c4, then you see all the weaknesses start to reveal themselves. Yeah, I don't think black can hold on to this pawn, right? Yeah, and then if he tries to play this, then he basically, black's queen set just collapses over here. So it's very sad. He cannot be captured with rook. He has to be captured with queen, right? And then the problem is, of course, is that it allows white to gain even more tempo after this move over here. And now, black plays a questionable move, I feel, which is he puts the queen on a8. I felt he might have had better chances with something like queen to c7 or going back to b6 or something. I mean, of course, the threat is like the rook is going to come in, but I don't know. But he chose to play queen to a8, a very weird square for the queen. I mean, of course, the threat here is that probably is hoping for like this kind of tricky discover checks, but of course, it's easily defended by just moving the king back to g1. Okay, over here, white Anish Giri chooses to put the queen back on g1. I'm a bit surprised. Like, why doesn't he go to h2, which is the whole purpose of him pushing h3? Now, probably he thinks that, okay, my rook belongs on this file, so I don't really need this g file anymore, so I can just bring it back to g1. So anyway, king to g1 was played, just getting out of that file, and now this queen looks a bit stupid along this in the corner of the board when it really should be in the center squares, right? Anyway, now since all of black's pieces are like a lot more passive, you compare them to the activity of white's pieces, they're a lot more centralized, so definitely white is a lot better over here. And not surprisingly, he goes in straight for the attack so I mean, not surprisingly, he goes in straight for the attack with queen to b5. Immediately, he's targeting all these light squares. He's targeting something like this d7 square over here. It's very hard for it is starting to get harder for black to defend this position, right? Because white's pieces, again, they are just so active. And then you compare them to the position of black's pieces over here, right? So over here, how is how is black going to defend against white's threats, right? I mean, soon he's going to come into this d7 square. He has moves at his disposal like f5 and something. His attack is going to be very strong. So how is black going to defend? And Wang Hao actually finds this nice resource, which is knight to d5. The idea, of course, is still want to block this open file over here, which does work for a while because of the takes. You are blocking the file, but immediately after rook to c1, you realize that, oh no, white still has quite some threats over here. He still has this open file that he can use even if this d file is closed. So black cannot rest, right? He still has a very tough job ahead of him. Right. So h6, giving the king some breathing space. Queen to d7. So already you see that even though white can't come in immediately, his queen, because it's just simply so much more active than as compared to black's weird looking queen over here. That's why white is able to get in his attack first, and the queen is just pressurizing all these weak pawns over here. They're putting pressure on f7, and it's very hard for black to find a good move over here, right? I mean, this queen is tied down to defending this pawn. This knight is tied down to stopping the rook from coming in. The king and the rook are tied down to this f7 pawn. How is black going to defend again? And another threat by white over here is something like f5, right? Because if let's say f5 and then takes, queen takes, and then you have the fork on the king as well as the knight, and then white just picks up the knight. So how is black going to defend? He chooses to play knight to f6, chasing away the queen. Many people felt that he should have tried something like knight to b6. The idea is that not only you threaten the queen, you also threaten some of white's weak pawns over here. So let's say after queen here, blah blah blah, takes. Then the analyzers actually gave this very interesting variation, and then they turned out that black actually manages to survive over here after something like this. Of course, the idea is that after you chase away this knight, then you just liquidate all the queen side pawns, and then I think over here with only pawns on the king side and the material being absolutely even, it should be pretty much a drawn endgame, right? So that was why knight to b6 should certainly have been considered, but it wasn't played. Instead, knight to f6 was played, and now there's no more threat against this a4 pawn. So white doesn't have to worry so much. So queen to d6, and now what is black to do over here, right? Of course, there are the threats of f5, there are the threats of rook to c7, and then queen to e7, and it's very bad for black. So can you find a good move for black over here, right? And Wang Hao actually chooses a very questionable move. He plays g6. Probably the idea is to try and gain some control over the f5, try to stop white from pushing it. But even according to Wang Hao's own words, he felt that this was a very bad move. It just weakens the entire king side. But according to him, he just simply couldn't find any other good moves. I mean, for example, if he goes back to knight to d5, then you have f5, and then you have the threats that I mentioned earlier on, right? If you take, then you just pick up the knight over here. Maybe you could go something like queen to e8, and then b3, then you try and go for counterplay by pushing b5, and I don't know, maybe this might work, but again, white still has the better position. He has rook to c7, and it's still quite hard for black to play over here. But definitely, I think it's better than g6. And why g6 is so bad is because after, first of all, white plays this b3 to remove this a4 weakness, and after h5, king to h2, finally you get into the shelter, and you see why g6 is weak. It's because you can do something like this, rook to g1, and then you have this potential knight sacrifice over here, knight takes g6, then pawn takes, rook takes, exposing the king. Then after that, queen takes, and then you give up the knight at the cost of 3, but you get 3 pawns back in return, and you just completely destroy the black king's pawn cover. I think it's very good compensation, to be honest. Right. So definitely the threat of knight takes g6 is very strong, and that's why black realized he has no choice but to try and defend with his king to g7. And over here, I think rook to c7 is playable. It's just, and then after that, queen to e7, and this is all just very simple. But white chooses to go for something fancier with queen to d4. So of course, there's this very nasty discover attack on this long diagonal that black has to be very careful of. And it creates a lot of these complications, which is actually quite significant, given that by this time and the 30th move, actually both sides were starting to run low on time. So rook to d8, this was a good defense actually, because it sets up this threat over here that we will actually look at again later on in the game. Right? So rook to d8, queen to b2. So white tries to put his queen on this long diagonal to maintain the tactical threat of this discover attack. Queen to b8. Finally, black activates the queen again, but I'm not sure whether is it too late to make a difference. b4, and the idea here is that you want to create a second weakness over here. You just want to, after you trade off everything, you have this second weakness, and then hopefully you try and tie down black's rook or his other pieces to defending it. Right. Okay, sorry. It takes, and over here, white plays a weird move. Rook to c4. I mean, yeah, queen to b4 would have been very natural, but I think he plays rook to c4 because he wants to, number one, put the queen on this, just keep the queen on this long diagonal and maintain the tactics along there. And number two, he wants to double up over here and then hopefully try and gang up on this weakness over here. The problem with rook to c4 was that he actually weakened the back rank of the white's position, and it allows some tactical resources by black, which fortunately for white, Wang Hao didn't manage to spot them in his time trouble. Now, what does black have over here? He has rook to d1, and at first glance it seems like, I mean, what is black trying to look at? He has nothing to attack over here, right? But the idea is that after rook takes b4, queen to d8, rook takes b7, queen to d5, and now you see the point of this. This queen controls this whole diagonal over here. This rook controls this, And then you see where they're aiming at. They're aiming at the white king over here. So how is white going to defend against this? Say after rook takes f7, king takes. Actually, white has no more follow-up attack. So if let's say he tries to grab the free piece by this, then black has this very nice saving resource. Rook to h1. I want to point out that I think queen to h1 doesn't work over here, because after something like this, then I think black has, amazingly black has no more follow-up attack, because this knight actually does a good job of covering all the key squares over here. This pawn also covers a lot of key squares, and I don't think black is able to follow up with this. But after rook to h1, black has a very nice way to save the game. King to g3, rook takes h3, king to so you see black is given up like a rook, a knight, and don't know how many pawns just to save this game. But after queen to h1, you notice that the white king has almost no cover left. And then after h4, blah blah blah, queen check, king takes. And even though actually black has no firepower to actually launch any checkmates or anything, he has enough resources to force a perpetual over here. And actually white has no choice but to accept the draw. So that was very insane. I mean, queen to d, rook, you have to see rook to d1, and then you have to see this queen maneuver, and then give up all this, like this 3 pawns and 1 knight over here. I mean, I'm really not surprised that Wang Hao wasn't able to spot it. It was just absolutely crazy. Instead, he plays, wait, sorry. I mean, so instead, he does, I think he was just pretty much resigned to his fate with like b3, rook to b4. I think at this point, black still had the chance of rook to d1, followed by putting a queen over here, right? But I think by then Wang Hao really was like, he pretty much just gave up at this point. Yeah. Then after this, queen takes, bishop, rook takes, and then now there's no more. There really is no more attack, because after queen goes back to defend, and then rook a7. After this, now of course the target here is the f7 pawn, right? So after rook up, queen up, knight, and the f7 pawn is pretty much going to fall. And over here, actually black resigns, because after this f7 pawn falls, first of all, white has just complete dominance of this 7 rank over here. After f7 falls, all these pawns are going to fall as well, and I think white is just completely winning over here. Right. Yeah, so a very nice game by Anish Giri. And actually, with this win over Wang Hao, he has managed to get to. He actually moved into joint second place alongside Karana and MVL. So really a great job to him. Of course, anything can still happen in this tournament. I think Nepo is still leading, followed by Karana, Giri, and MVL in second position. Of course, this is only round 9, and there are still about 5 more rounds to go. Round 10 will be played tonight, and you can watch the live stream on chess.com as well as Twitch. Definitely, we are looking forward to more exciting games, and we will see who manages to challenge Magnus Carlsen for the World Chess Championship 2021. Thank you very much for watching.